Welcome to the Body Ethos Podcast, where we're shifting the culture from sickness to health. Before we dive in, please remember that this podcast is for educational purposes only and is not a substitute for medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always consult your healthcare provider before making any changes to your health routine. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Body Ethos Podcast, where we're all about shifting the culture from sickness to health. I'm your host, Jessica Whitmill, and today we're diving into a fascinating and often overlooked piece of the root cause puzzle, which is primitive reflexes. If you've never heard of primitive reflexes, or if you've only associated them with babies, today's episode will be eye-opening. These reflexes are foundational to early childhood development, but when they aren't integrated properly, they can lead to challenges in childhood as well as adulthood. From anxiety to poor posture to balance issues and even chronic health issues. So today our guest, Joanna, who is a sensory coach and works with primitive reflexes, she is going to be talking all about this. So whether you're a parent concerned about your child or an adult navigating health issues that won't budge, this is a conversation that might be a missing piece for you. So I'm so excited about today. Joanna, thank you so much for joining us here on the Body Ethos Podcast.
Thank you for having me, Jessica. It's a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. So could you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into this work?
Of course. I was one of those kids who never knew what I wanted to be when I grew up. We moved around a lot. I wasn't lost per se, but I just didn't know what my niche was. I didn't know exactly where I fit in this world. So I did a variety of different things. I majored in French in college, thinking that I would teach, and I ended up not teaching. I didn't get my teaching degree. But I just did a variety of different things in corporate America, and also taught preschool. But I always taught gymnastics on the side. It was my passion. I had been a gymnast, not a very good one, but I had been a gymnast. And I found that I was a much better coach than I ever was a gymnast. And, coaching gymnastics a few hours a week doesn't pay the bills. So it wasn't something that I did full time, just for fun and because I loved it. And I always kind of wondered, why is it that I can teach, beginning of a new session, you get a group of 8 to 10 little girls in a beginner class. Why is it that one or two of them come in already knowing how to do a cartwheel? One or two get it in the first couple sessions, and the other, 4 or 5 struggle. What is it about that connection? Why can't they make their brains make their body do what they want it to do? If I'm using a variety of different teaching methods and helping them, and what's going on? So that kind of always puzzled me. And then my mom had carpal tunnel surgery, and she worked with an occupational therapist for hand rehab. And she said, "Hey, Joanna, this is a really neat field. I think you should check it out." So I did. I did a ton of research. I took a year's worth of prerequisites because my French degree did nothing for a science-based master's program. And I went to North Carolina for graduate school in occupational therapy. Sadly, I got sick in the second semester, so I wasn't able to finish. But what it did, the benefits of my being there, were it really connected the brain and the body in ways that it just opened new fields for me. So I was sick for a long time, sadly, but I worked with a job coach when I was working on re-entering the job field. And she had me create just a list of qualities in a dream job. And I just wrote out this list, kids, fun, brain, body, some exercise potentially, progressions, things to make it harder, things to make it easier, making that brain grow. And I found a job posting, it was within a week, of a sensory motor coach. And so I applied and I worked at this company. I was their head sensory motor coach for 3 years and learned so much about primitive reflexes, hemispheric balance. Primitive reflexes were just a small portion of what they did there. And so I eventually left and created a small business where we focus primarily on the primitive reflexes because they're really the foundation they're the blueprint for brain development.
Absolutely. I love that story. And I love how you use the power of manifestation to write
Mhm.
down exactly and get clear on what you wanted, and the universe provided. So that is
It sure did.
awesome. And
Yes.
I love that it just kind of connected everything for you and these questions that you had. I think that's where a lot of us are. We start questioning different things that
Mhm.
leads us kind of to our purpose, right? Of
Exactly.
like, why isn't this working? Or why am I different? Or why is this connection not working for these girls, right? Or why was I a better coach versus a gymnast, or
Mhm.
like different things like that. It leads us to what our purpose is. So I love that.
Thanks.
So let's start with the basics then, because I know that we talked kind of a little bit about sensory motor and the brain connection to the body, but
Mhm.
what exactly are primitive reflexes and why are they so crucial for early development?
So primitive reflexes, they're called primitive. Primitive meaning they're formed either in utero or shortly after birth. Reflex means it's an involuntary response to some sort of stimulus, whatever that stimulus might be. They each have it's like a call response sort of thing, and they each
Hmm.
have a purpose. They're supposed to be there. Um, Most people, if they've heard of primitive reflexes, it's when for example, if a child was born prematurely and that reflex didn't kick in. I'll give you a quick example. There's a reflex called the rooting reflex. When you touch a baby's cheek, they turn their head and they start to suckle. That helps them look for their food source. It's the precursor basically for breastfeeding. Okay, it teaches them that. So if they're born prematurely and that reflex didn't kick in, typically that's where people will have heard of it because they need to be taught how to breastfeed because that
Hmm.
pathway wasn't ever established. My perspective is really more on the other end when the child is born, they've begun to grow, but they're having sensory issues, sensory behavior challenges, anxieties, those kinds of things, because the reflex, while it had its purpose, was supposed to go dormant when its purpose was fulfilled, but it didn't go away. So then it blocks the subsequent development. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's really helpful. So you're working with children that retain those primitive reflexes then.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah, and it can be even into adulthood too,
Mhm.
right?
Yes. And the thing about primitive reflexes, I wish we could say that when they go away, when they go dormant, that those neural pathways get pruned, but unfortunately they don't. I have seen research that shows that adults with Alzheimer's and dementia can have reflexes pop back up.
Interesting.
Yes. Now,
Okay. And
exhibiting those,
mhm.
sorry to
Oh, go
interrupt.
ahead. Yeah.
Uh, those primitive reflexes in the adults with Alzheimer's and dementia, they can be through exercises, specific exercises, they can go dormant again. And that doesn't get rid of the Alzheimer's and dementia, but it improves their quality of life for up to 5 years, according to that study.
Oh, wow. That was going to be my follow-up question, is like what to do about it. So yeah, that's really interesting. And I think just something that like a lot of those folks are working with an occupational therapist in a lot of ways, but maybe not tapping into that specific, issue, which is that primitive reflex popping back up when they
Exactly.
have that issue. Yeah. So
Exactly.
something
Yeah.
that if you're taking care of an elderly person who has that, it's good to know because it could
Mhm.
really help them, like you said, quality of life up to 5 years. That's
Exactly.
amazing. Yeah.
It's a big deal.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that that's why I'm really excited to have this conversation because it's so far reaching. It's beyond just childhood, it goes into adulthood too. So, could you give us maybe some examples of common primitive reflexes that can be retained and how that looks like if they're still active later in life?
Of course. So there are 8 that I look at. There are probably 30, but the big players are the ones that I look at. Just to continue with that rooting reflex. So the rooting reflex kicks it,
Hmm.
in utero, and then it serves its purpose, and then it's supposed to go dormant, right? When the baby is breastfeeding, they no longer need to have that movement present, right? That stimulus doesn't need to still be there. So the reflex goes dormant, and then they have the choice. If something touches their cheek, they can turn if they want to. It's not an automatic response. Um, it's a scale of 0 to 4, so it's not an all or nothing. Mostly, if it's still present in a child or even in an adult, it just feels ticklish. Okay.
Mm.
So when this specific reflex doesn't go away, it can lead to things like needing to chew. I've seen kids and adults who chew on their
Ah.
shirts. I had one kiddo who drooled, and he wasn't even aware of his drooling. It can lead to things like thumb sucking, chewing on nails, a variety of different things. Now, that's one of the least impactful reflexes, but it's visual. So I like to talk about that one.
Totally. And I'm sure there's some adults listening to this going like, I chewed my shirt in second
Uh-huh.
and third grade, or I still bite my nails. So
Uh-huh.
wondering if that's retained. So I like that one. What are
Right.
some other ones that might be common?
Probably the most common and the most impactful is called the Moro reflex. It's Moro, named for the guy who discovered it, who coined it. It is the precursor to the adult startle reflex. So as an adult, if you're driving in a car, you hear a loud noise, you look in your rearview mirror, you see the lights flashing. You're like, oh, goodness. Sympathetic nervous system kicks in. You're like, oh, my gosh, that's an ambulance. I need to get out of the way.
Mm-hmm.
That's supposed to be there. You want that to be there because it gives us the opportunity to act accordingly, right?
Absolutely.
If a bear is chasing you, you want to be able to do whatever you do to get away from a bear. I'm not an outdoorsy person, so I don't know, but
Totally.
you don't climb a tree, you don't ride, bear spray, I don't know. Regardless. So in an infant, they have ideally been warm, protected, fed, sounds are muted, sights are muted, just loved and protected, ideally, right, in utero. When they're born, all of a sudden, they're exposed to all of these stimuli: sights, sounds, smells, taste, and gravity. They've never experienced gravity before. So when they sense danger, and that can be a variety of different things, all of these sensational feelings can help them feel dangerous. It can help them feel danger. They can feel unprotected. They can feel unsafe. So their response, and it's involuntary: face flushes, eyes dilate, arms and legs flail out like an X shape, and they take a huge breath in. As soon as their face turns blue and you think they're never going to breathe again, they let out a huge scream, ah! And arms and legs curl in. It looks like they're hugging a tree. It's actually kind of cute when you see it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that is their way of getting our attention when they feel danger.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I believe I've seen that before with an infant. Yeah.
It's really cute, right? And we go and check on them. We see if they need a clean diaper. We see if they need to be fed. We see if, that's their way of getting their needs met without knowing it, right? They don't realize they're doing that. Now, as the baby begins to grow and starts to recognize mom's face, starts to recognize the smell of grandma's perfume, starts to recognize the taste of breast milk or formula, starts to get used to those things, that reflex begins to go dormant. Once that reflex is dormant, they have a choice, right? Ooh, I don't recognize that face. I'm going to cry. I don't like that, right? But that's by choice versus that automatic startle response. And that startle response kicks up that sympathetic nervous system that keeps them in fight or flight. Right? So it has its purpose. It's like a blueprint for developing the process of getting used to all of these stimuli. But then it's supposed to go away. When it doesn't go away like it's supposed to, you get a 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 70-year-old person who startles easily. And this one correlates to all of the senses. It can be an aversion to certain sounds. It can be an aversion to most foods. Most of the kids I see will eat about 6 foods, usually including mac and cheese, pizza, chicken nuggets, Cheez-Its. It's very limited because those feel safe. And they typically want to control their environment so that they can feel safe.
Makes a lot of sense. Absolutely. So you see this then kind of going into adulthood of children that are trying to control their environment through food, or who are easily startled, have anxiety, that type of thing. And even adults, right? Who are maybe, because I've met adults who are like, I startle really easy, right? You have to be like careful around that friend or that family member. And so is this potentially like a retained primitive reflex? Do you know if it's because they didn't feel safe to, resolve that, where they never got used to it, or if it's just something that they, somehow skipped because maybe their brain is different, or I'm not sure if you can answer that.
Yes, I can. And the answer is there's no one clear answer to that. Correlation doesn't mean causation. So somebody who startles easily doesn't necessarily have the Moreau reflex. It's in it.
Makes
Like I
sense.
said,
Yeah.
it's not an all or nothing kind of thing, but it's possible. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes these reflexes don't go away for a variety of different reasons. It's epigenetics, some nature, some nurture, a combination of both. We don't really know why necessarily. And I don't necessarily need to know why, as long as there's not ongoing neglect, abuse, or trauma that's going to continue to have that brainstem say, we want this reflex active. Because it's the brainstem's job is to keep us safe.
Absolutely.
And these reflexes all live in the brainstem. They're very, very primitive in the reptilian portion of the brain. So their job is to say, yep, you know what? I'm going to keep you safe by making this reflex. And it's not necessarily helpful anymore, but that's the brainstem's job, and it thinks it's helping.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we have to honor the intelligence of the body that it is trying to keep us safe. Right.
Right.
But then recognize where we need to maybe go in and do some therapies to promote that safety in the body.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, it's interesting you're talking about this. What kind of challenges or diagnoses are typically that you see that are retained with these or connected to these retained reflexes, both in children and adults? And it may help some parents think like, okay, my kid has been diagnosed with this or has suspected this, and maybe we need to go back to the basics here, like literally these primitive reflexes, which are foundational. So I'd love for you to maybe discuss some of those.
Absolutely. So the biggest ones that I see, and it's sort of pervasive: ADD, ADHD, autism, sensory processing disorder, learning disabilities, dyslexia, dysgraphia. Those are the big diagnoses I typically see. Now, I don't work with diagnoses. I'm not a medical professional per se. What I do is exercise based. So I'm really a sensory motor coach. And we do these exercises to stimulate the reflex so that it can go dormant on its own. So the symptoms are so varied that it's really hard to narrow it down, because every child presents differently. Every adult presents differently. It can be anything from needing noise canceling headphones all the time to behavior issues. There's another reflex called the spinal galant reflex. It's my favorite to talk about. I forgot to mention it. So when you touch a baby's back on one side, their hip will flex to that side. If you touch their back on the other side, their other hip will flex to that side. The purpose for that one is to wiggle their way through the birth canal. We help ourselves be born, which I just think is so cool.
It is.
So when that reflex doesn't go away, and there are a variety of different reasons why it might not go away, C-section, for example, being born prematurely. Again, nature, nurture, it could be too much tummy time, not enough tummy time, any kind of abuse, neglect, trauma. That kiddo is super sensitive on their back. So that can be things like being picky about the clothing that they wear, feeling super ticklish, in a like overly ticklish, like not just a normal ticklish. They can either love to be hugged and touched or hate to be hugged and touched. They can be picky about the tags in their clothing. So it varies so much from one reflex to the next, and then the combination of reflexes too. So the diagnosis is really the top-down approach from my perspective. The diagnosis says you have, and I'm making this up, okay, I'm exaggerating. If you have autism, if you have 6 of these 12 symptoms, right? You have ADHD if you have 5 of these 8 symptoms. What I do is I look at the symptoms, because the symptoms of retained primitive reflexes and most diagnoses are all from that same pool.
Yeah.
So mine is the bottom-up approach. Let's look at the reflexes, see which reflexes are present, see what symptoms that they're causing, and then get those reflexes to go dormant so that we don't necessarily need a diagnosis. Now, that's not to say that it cures autism, it cures ADHD. It alleviates some of the symptoms. And that's really our goal.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's a multi-purposed approach, right? Like I always talk about, it takes a team.
Yes.
But I think that what you're doing is really getting to the root, right? Are these retained reflexes that keep the nervous system in hyperactivation. And then we have these adaptions over time, which then look at like ADHD or, things like that. And of course, some things are, like dyslexia and things like that. That's actually the brain developing differently. So
Yes.
that's not something like you can really change, or like autism and things like that. But there are some, like you said, correlations there to these root causes of retained primitive reflexes that can really help these children and adults cope with whatever diagnosis they have and
Exactly.
succeed in the world probably a lot better.
Exactly.
Yeah. And also just kind of, and so I'd love to talk about how this manifests as anxiety, because anxiety is something that most children have these days. It's really, really sad. Most adults suffer with it. It is probably one of the biggest mental health diagnoses that we see.
Mhm.
So how does primitive reflexes influence anxiety in children and adults?
Again, it's not a simple answer. It's a variety
Yeah.
of different answers. But imagine you have eight that primitive reflexes that I look at. Your body doesn't feel like it's your own. It feels like it's out of
Mm,
control sometimes. So you have to control your environment to feel safe. So feeling safe, for example, with that Moreau reflex, if you're constantly in fight or flight and you don't even know it, the world does not feel like a safe place. Right?
absolutely.
So anything new coming at you causes anxiety. It causes stress. It causes an I don't know what to do feeling.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
The other answer to that is the vestibular system. There's a huge correlation between the vestibular system and anxiety. And I know that sounds strange, but it's true. And it relates back to this. One of the reflexes is called the tonic labyrinthine reflex, TLR. We call it tonic for short. This one has to do with the inner ear and your body's response to gravity. It's your body's ability to rewrite itself after it, like when your head moves. So there's a head writing reflex, right? So you want to get, when you're an infant and you can't control your neck, when your head tips this way, how do you get it back up so you don't feel lopsided, so you don't feel like you're going to tip over? Well, the tonic reflex has you over exaggerate. So if your head tips back, that reflex makes you go forward. If your head tips forward, that reflex makes you go back, hopefully to get that sense of fighting against gravity. And it's always front to back on the tonic.
Mm-hmm.
But the correlation between the tonic and the vestibular system is when you feel like you're not, okay, I'm going to use the word dizzy just because there's a spinning protocol that I use. When you feel like you're dizzy, it feels like it's never going to end.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It correlates then to like an anxiety attack. When you feel anxious, have you ever had an anxiety attack?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
It
Mm-hmm.
feels like it's never, ever, ever going to end. In that
Mm-hmm.
moment, you want to do, like most people will say, I want to die to stop feeling like this. Okay,
Mm.
maybe not most people say that. Some people say that.
Yeah.
You just want that feeling to go away. Same is true with dizziness. And when that vestibular system is either immature or out of whack, you feel out of whack. You feel dizzy, you feel out of control. And that correlates to anxiety. Okay?
Absolutely.
Once we get that body and brain to regulate with spinning, to get that vestibular system matured, there's a click somewhere that says, yes, I feel dizzy right now, but I know it's going to go away.
Mm.
And then when we put that same path on anxiety, yes, I feel anxious right now, and I know it's going to go away. It makes those highs and lows of anxiety less. So yes,
Mm-hmm.
everybody gets anxious from time to time, right? But that path is not necessarily smoother, right? Because it really depends on circumstances. Everybody experiences anxieties and stress, but how we handle them, how we are able to respond to them versus react is a big deal.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And like you said, creating that safety in the body with these exercises, or just an understanding of how it could be a retained primitive reflex that's creating this dizziness that we're,
Yes,
it's a subconscious thing. We're not conscious of it,
right.
can really make a huge difference and empower that person to really take control of their body, right? And
Exactly.
have tools. So I love that. That's so awesome. That was such a good explanation of
Thank
how
you.
that works. So I was curious, just kind of some of your opinions. So,
Mhm.
primitive reflexes seemed so foundational to development, except I don't think a lot of parents know about them or even adults. So why do you think that is? And how can we help bring this more to the mainstream? Or do you see it becoming more of the mainstream as parents are seeking alternatives for their children?
It's not mainstream knowledge. It's not common knowledge. Number one, because the medical model can't address it in an easy way. It's all exercise and movement based. The other thing is there really isn't much research about primitive reflexes, at least not in that country. In this country, there is tons of research in the UK, Poland, Australia, and New Zealand, and it's really poignant. It's very good. And there's some in this country, just not a whole lot. The hardest part about doing research is that each person presents so differently. It's hard to get a control group that has similar issues that also gets similar results. Because the combination of reflexes, if you have all 8 reflexes, that might present the same way as another child with those 8 reflexes. It might not. Yeah. It really depends on the strength of them and so many different things. So it's really hard to get that verifiable, replicatable data to show that the research is effective. Similar to the way sensory processing disorder has kind of grown in its awareness and in its it's still sort of in its infancy. Primitive reflex integration is also very much in its infancy.
Wow, that's awesome. Thank you for that. That's so helpful. And it's cool to see that there's an international awareness of it and that it is coming more to the States, that there's professionals like you that are bringing awareness to it and advocating for kids and adults on this topic. But like you said, I think it is just one of those things where every person is so bio-individual. So I think you just need to advocate for your own case and seek out a team that can support you or your child in whatever symptomology you're presenting with, right? Because you can't always fit into a neat control group or demographic. Like we all have our own special intricacies, right? But I love how this can be so root cause driven, right? I'm all about root cause. And I feel like this is definitely one of those like root causes. I was wondering too, I know we talked about like autism, sensory processing, ADHD, anxiety. What about autoimmune concerns that people have? Do you know much about that connection between primitive reflexes and autoimmune conditions, or even just chronic health issues into childhood or adulthood? Do you work with a lot of kids that have those chronic health issues?
Sometimes I do. The simplified answer is that that's kind of out of my wheelhouse, but there's obviously some interaction. If the body is not acting the way it's supposed to in its infancy, it's being inundated and bombarded with external stimuli. And if it's not growing the way it's supposed to, the way it's prescribed to, maybe I shouldn't use that word because I'm not talking about prescription, but if it's not growing the way it was intended to, any kind of, bug can get in, any kind of problem is exacerbated.
Absolutely.
And that's, I think, again, ground level root cause of those kinds of things. So the short answer is, I'm not an expert in that. The long answer is, of course, there's a correlation.
Yeah, I see it too. And I'm not an expert in this topic either, but I can just see how when the nervous system is in a chronic fight or flight and the body isn't developing the way it should, we know there's an interaction between the nervous system and the immune system. So things like autoimmune conditions or chronic, sinus infections or whatever, some kids are just always sick, how it could correlate with that, where their body is just in this constant struggle. And then one other question I had too was for parents listening, because I know there's probably some parents taking some notes right now. How would they know if primitive reflex work could help their child? And I know it's bio-individual, but are there any like tall tales where they should be like, I should probably seek out someone like you, Joanna?
Typically, by the time parents come to me, it's because there are behavior issues, behavior challenges. Typically, it's the sensory issues and high anxiety. So it can show up in so many different ways. But like you said, there are some telltale signs. put yourself in this situation for a second. You're a kiddo, you're 5 years old. The heat went out in your house and it's cold outside. Your grown-ups are arguing about how to fix the heat. One wants to go to Home Depot and do it themselves. One wants to call the expert. So you're listening to the arguing. You're cold. You're overwhelmed. You're tired because it's late and you should be in bed already. You get squished into the car because the argument was won and you're going to Home Depot. Your sister is next to you chewing watermelon scented bubble gum. Your senses are in overload. And you get to Home Depot and it's just meltdown city.
Yep.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Now, the stereotypical kid is going to be able to handle that. They might cry. They might be, obnoxious or rude. If the overreaction is total sensory meltdown, lying on the ground, kicking, screaming, cannot control their behavior, probably there are some reflexes going on.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So that's the extreme. Sense. That's the extreme. On the other end, we've got the probably 7-8-year-old kiddo who is super smart, is great at memorizing things, but they find they're the teacher's pet. They're great at reading people's faces, telling you what you want to hear, super sweet, well-behaved. They get to 2nd or 3rd grade and somebody finally realizes that they don't know how to read. Okay, it could be that other end. So it doesn't have to be behavior. It just has to be challenges that are overwhelming.
Absolutely.
Other simple signs, toe walking, beyond, the very early years. Sensory meltdowns, needing to wear noise canceling headphones, very picky eating, bedwetting after the age of 5. If you can rule out sexual abuse, we'd want to do that first. Kiddos who can't sit still. They have ants in their pants. They're moving all over the place. Kids who are 6, 7, 8 who don't know how to skip. Kids who are 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 who can't ride a bike yet. Okay, kids who have trouble swimming. So it's all of those coordination kinds of things that these reflexes are blocking. They're blocking that path of development that creates all of those coordination skills. So now, just to backtrack for 1 second, just because a kid has a reflex doesn't mean that they can't swim, doesn't mean that they can't ride a bike. Excuse me. What it does mean is that when they are doing those things that are peer age appropriate, their brain is working extra hard to do them. So stress, that's another big one. There's so many different ways that it can present, and that makes it challenging. At the same time, the ones who need it most are typically the ones I see because they're having massive issues.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. But I think it's important too to recognize that even if your kid is struggling on kind of a more micro level than like this like large scale kind of meltdown, can't function in the classroom or with siblings and things like that, it's still important to maybe consider something like this because I had a dyslexia expert on another episode, and we were just talking about how when these things aren't recognized at a younger age, it can really stunt self-esteem and academic performance and even, athletic abilities in kids who may have gifts and abilities in those areas, but they just need some extra support to get to where they need to go. And so I think I think it's a really important topic to recognize and even for just parents to maybe consider, just getting some of that body work done or evaluations done on their child if they're having these issues, even if they seem more mild, I think personally. I don't know if you agree with that, but
definitely.
Yeah.
It's likely in our society, especially for people who have lived through COVID times, that most of us have at least one reflex that it either has always been present or has popped back up. Because trauma causes the brainstem to say, hey, we want you safe. So it's very likely that most of us have at least one. Now, as adults, we find workarounds. We find ways to compensate. We cater to things in our lives that focus on our strengths.
Absolutely.
And that's well and good. We want to do,
Mhm.
we feel good about things we're good at. So we do things that we're good at that don't cause that much stress.
Mhm.
Well, most of
Mhm.
us, not all of us. Some of us thrive on that stress. Kids, we don't want them to have those workarounds, right? Because then they miss out on that full development and full growth. We
Absolutely.
want them to
Mhm.
be exposed to right brain strengths, left brain strengths, from arts and crafts to math and science. We want all of that exposure so that then they have a very strong, well-rounded brain, and then they can choose where to go from there.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that completely. I think it's one of those things where, I'm kind of sad about maybe some adults who maybe didn't reach their full potential because they've always been compensating.
Mhm.
And obviously, I see that a lot in my practice, just with like health issues and mental health issues and trauma, people kind of coping their way through life instead of living out their full potential through life.
Exactly.
So I
Exactly.
think this is an important topic to help your child or even yourself, no matter what age, fully actualize your full potential when we help retrain the nervous system in this a very root cause way.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
absolutely. I love that.
Oftentimes I will get dads who say, well, he's just wild and crazy. He's a boy. I was wild and crazy because I'm a boy. And I'm like, yes, but it doesn't have to be that way.
Yeah.
Yes, he is a boy. And yes, boys tend to be more rambunctious than girls stereotypically. It doesn't have to be that way.
No, it
It doesn't
doesn't.
have to
Yeah.
be hard. It doesn't have
Mhm.
to be a struggle.
Absolutely. Well, and I think too, just those like little things that you mentioned of like, I remember like being at camp and like some kids struggling to swim at an age appropriate time, right? Like
Mhm.
couldn't pass the swim test at Girl Scout camp or, kids that like struggled with riding a bike and were on training wheels longer than their peers. It
Mhm.
adds a lot of emotional stress and further
Yes.
trauma in a
Oh
lot of
my
ways
gosh.
because you
Yes.
can't keep up with your peers and how
Mhm.
that has long-term effects, right? Of
Right.
those times where we can all remember that time where we weren't keeping up with our peers and how that wounded us.
Mhm.
And
Right.
so I think just, not kind of pushing it aside of like, oh, well, that's just them. That's just how they are.
Mhm.
But like actually maybe taking it a little more seriously and digging deep into like, okay, how can we help their body and their brain connect to be
Right.
able to do this? Because there's obviously a disconnection there.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And I developed our logo very intentionally. It's the building blocks for brain development is sort of our tagline, and the foundations for what I do are confidence, play, and coordination. Not
Mm-hmm.
necessarily in that order, but sometimes in that order. You want play. Everything should be play focused. Kids learn so much through play, structured and
Absolutely.
unstructured. But
Mhm.
they have to gain that confidence as they grow. And a lot of the times when kids come to me, they believe they're the bad kid because they're always in
Mhm.
trouble. They believe they're not smart. They believe
Yeah,
at an early age, we define ourselves based on our
absolutely.
experiences, and it doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't have to stay that way.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. I think if more kids got this type of help, and just help in general with all of these different areas that they may be struggling with, then we would have well-adjusted adults seeing their full potential, and that would have a ripple effect to society as well in a
Exactly.
really positive way. So
Exactly.
I love that. I love this work that you're doing.
Thank you.
So, okay, so someone's listening right now and they're kind of putting together all the dots. So all this is clicking. What
Mhm.
are Beck's next steps for them? How can they get support for themselves or even their child?
Um, the best way is to get an evaluation. And there are practitioners all over the country, all over the world, honestly, who do this work. You just have to find them. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I only work locally in the Denver area, but I know practitioners around the world.
Okay.
So I
Okay,
can do
great.
great referrals. The reason I only work locally is because I use a tool called cold laser, and it has to be used in person. It improves the. So, long story short, I guess the primitive reflexes. I picture brain development as like a dream catcher or a spider web. Did I share this with you, Jessica?
No, not yet.
Okay.
Yeah, would
All
love to
right.
hear.
So if you've got a dream catcher and you've got all the different pathways, right? Because it's like a spider web. You
Mm-hmm.
want a nerve impulse to go from one side to the other, from point
Mm-hmm.
A to point, we'll call it C. Okay. Now, the clear, direct path is just simple, one to the next. Okay. The reflexes, though, are popping up and blocking that clear path, so that nerve impulse is getting there. If it weren't getting there, we'd have more dysfunction. Okay. But it is getting there. That's why a kid with the ATNR reflex can ride a bike. They're just working that much harder because their brain power is going the hard, indirect route. Doing a very specific exercise introduces the correct, easiest, most effective brain pathway. It says, let's go from A to C, no rest of the alphabet. Let's go straight from here to here. What I do is I use a tool called cold laser. Mine looks like a flashlight. I shine it at their brainstem while they're doing the exercise. On a biological level, it stimulates the mitochondria in the cells to produce more energy to help those cells do their job. And then as they're dead and dying, they move on. And so the new cells that come in learn to do it the right way the first time.
Love that.
So it's amazing technology. I love it. And it eliminates the need for so much repetition. So you can do this at home. You can do primitive reflex work at home, preferably with the guidance of a professional, but you can do it at home. I use cold laser. So if you do it at home, it takes repetition. Usually what's recommended is up to 3 times a day, 10 to 15 reps per reflex. Sometimes it's treated one at a time. Sometimes they're treated all at once. Depends on your practitioner and their methodology. And it can take up to 2 years for all of those reflexes to go dormant. In my program, using the cold laser, we can get the reflexes to go away in 8 weeks.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's got, and that is dependent on the child's ability and willingness to do the exercises. So sometimes that is an issue, but not so much usually. It's not like a boot camp. It's really just very specific movements.
I love that. Well, and I'm all about the mitochondria and the quantum and using light and that input to, charge the mitochondria and reprogram. So I love that you use that. I didn't realize that. That's so cool. I'm going to have another guest talking a lot about that. So this is like a cool kind of segue to kind of go into all of that. But I just love how it can be used in so many different applications because light is so important for the cell and the brainstem. So, so I love that you're using that to accelerate the process and bringing that input to the body to say like, hey, we can get going and we can rewire this really quickly. So I can see how going in person with somebody like you could be a real benefit. And help get those symptom relief a lot quicker, which is a huge benefit as well. So for those of you, I will be linking Joanna's information in the show notes. You can find her here in Denver if you're local, and then reach out or maybe even come by if you're in town so you can get at least maybe an evaluation or something like that. So that'd be awesome. And then anything else you'd like to add before we close? I wanted to kind of open the floor. I've loved this discussion.
Me too. I really appreciate your having me. My goal really is to educate people. And if my program is the right one for them, that's great. And if not, that's okay too. But just to educate people on what primitive reflexes are, how they work and why they're there, and what happens when they don't integrate like they're supposed to, because it's not the child's fault. A lot of times it's not their fault. And the big one here is it's not the parent's fault. So many parents come to me with all of that shame because we expect parents to be perfect. We expect parents to do it the right way, to know what they're doing. There's no manual. And even if there were a manual, it wouldn't fit, right? It's not a one size fits all for parenting. We parent each child differently. There's a funny commercial about, I want to say it's like a Huggies or a diaper commercial where with the first child, you get, the perfect car seat and the perfect diaper bag, and you have the kid and you've got the snacks and everything is just laid out perfectly, and you get them in a car to go somewhere. With the second kid, you've got a kid in the hand, a bottle in the hand, and you run out the door.
Yes.
Right. So honestly, every child needs different style, different parenting, different tools, different techniques, and we help with that too. But I think the most important thing for parents to take out of this whole thing is that it's not their fault. There's so many different reasons why primitive reflexes might not integrate, and it has nothing to do with parenting.
And yeah, that's such a beautiful message because I think a lot of parents are probably maybe even kicking themselves like, why didn't I catch this sooner in my child? They're now in college, listening to this episode or finding out about this. Or even people who might be listening to this and might be like, why didn't my mom catch this?
Right. Yeah.
Or my teachers or something
Yeah.
like that. But I think you're right. Like it's one of those things where it's so bio individual and
Mhm.
so nuanced to your specific needs as a human, right? And so there's no you don't get a very bio individual blueprint for each one of your children when they come out of the
Right.
womb.
Right.
You have to figure it out as you go. uh, like you said, we're all so different.
Yeah.
I know my, parenting me versus my younger sister versus
Mhm.
like the middle brother was very different from my mom and dad.
For
So,
sure.
yeah, we all needed our own handbook, but that's not how
Right.
life works. So,
It's
yeah,
not. No.
yeah, it's such a good reminder. Such a good
Yeah.
reminder. Thank you for that.
Mhm.
So, one final question for you as we close. So, as you know, on the Body Ethos podcast, we're all about helping people take those meaningful steps so we can
Mhm.
ultimately help shift their lives and their families' lives, and ultimately our culture from sickness to health. So, what is one impactful or practical way that someone listening today can start taking that step and shift in the right direction?
Movement. Movement. Move your body. Move your child's body. Put the screens away. Put them down. Put them down while you're talking to your child. Don't get your child a phone until they need it, right?
Mhm.
Interact, move, play. That's really, let's get back to the basics.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's so important. Yeah. Um, couldn't have said it better myself. I agree. We need less technology and more real life
Right.
and these days and connection back to the earth and play and each other. And I
Mhm.
think everything would be a lot better. So
Right.
we'd be a lot healthier mentally, emotionally, spiritually. So thank you for that good reminder, Joanna. Well, thank you again so much for joining us today. We really appreciated having you. And thanks to everybody for listening to another episode of the Body Ethos podcast. I hope today's conversation helped you maybe connect some dots between these retained primitive reflexes and the nervous system patterns that can impact kids and adults in powerful ways. If this episode resonated with you, don't wait. Take the next step, whether that's reaching out to a practitioner or exploring therapies that integrate these primitive reflexes or simply becoming more curious about your own body's responses. I think is really important because knowledge is power and healing begins when we have this type of awareness. So thank you for bringing that to all of us today. If you loved this conversation, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And of course, check out the show notes below for links of how to get in contact with today's guest, Joanna, who is here in Denver, as well as some resources as well around this topic, and to learn more just about how primitive reflexes and the nervous system are all connected. Remember that your body has wisdom. I think that that's really kind of another takeaway from this show. So when we get to that root, we can start shifting not only just our own lives, but the world around us. So until next time, I hope everyone stays curious and empowered and keep shifting that culture from sickness to health together. So thank you so much, everyone. Have a great day.